Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm your host, CJ Towell, and I run product marketing here at Eppo. And today I'm joined by our head of product, Eric Metelka. He's going to be taking you through our new Eppo Protocols feature and how it enables companies to build pervasive experimentation cultures. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. So if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A box below, and we'll get to those. The session will be recorded in case you have any friends, family members, or loved ones who couldn't be here today, or if you'd just like to watch the session again. And if you're interested in a broader demo of the Eppo platform, you can join us every second Tuesday of the month, and you'll see the next session is there on February 11th. If you follow that URL, or if you just go to our website, geteppo.com, you'll be able to see that and register and get a view of the whole Eppo platform, including protocols. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Eric to talk protocols. Thank you, Eric.
Hey folks, thanks for being here with us today. And as CJ said, I'm going to take you through protocols. All right, so today we're going to talk about experimentation culture and increasing experimentation velocity. This is key to what we're building with protocols. And so we're going to dive right into the root of what we see about how the best companies experiment and why protocols are a key enabler of being able to experiment on all of the things and do so with a great velocity. I'll then take you through a demo, and at the end we'll have some Q&A. All right, so let's talk about experimentation culture. So when we look at who Eppo works with and who we get inspiration from, where the makers of Eppo come from, we see a number of key pillars that enable great experimentation culture. The first is pervasive testing across all different areas of the business, whether that be product, marketing, AI, engineering. You really need to be testing every area and not just in one. And I'll talk a little bit more about what pervasive testing means in a second. Two is that your experimentation tool needs to be built for enterprise data stacks. It needs to be built on your own data. And it has to be enabled for end users, typically engineers and PMs, but also marketers and designers. They all need to be able to self-serve. They need to be able to run experiments themselves, analyze the data, and I'll show you how this comes into play as we talk about the experimentation process. And the last is you need to be able to understand what's going on in the program. And that's with different measurement tools to understand how many experiments are being run. Are they being run in ways good or bad? And then what's the output of those experiments? Are there winners? What's the impact they're having? And doing so with a level of governance and quality such that the experiments aren't just having that output, but have the right inputs such that the results are trustworthy. So those are the key elements of a experimentation culture. So I mentioned pervasive testing. What does that mean? Well, when we look at the experimentation journey of most companies and even the journey that I've been on myself, it usually starts out with just a handful of tests. And usually you're doing simple things to your website. Maybe you're doing some copy tests to start. Something really simple, takes little resources, and you're trying to just drive, a little bit of impact. And this usually moves then into product testing where you now have a team. Usually it's a growth team that's focused on this, and they're the experts on how to experiment. And they are doing things within the product. They have engineers, and so they're making things improve, such as onboarding flows, upsell promos. I myself have run growth teams. We focus on things like conversion funnels, conversion to checkout, even retention. And these are about repeatable processes. We knew how to do these, but you still have bottlenecks involved in those processes as you coordinate with different stakeholders that are involved. After this, as orgs continue to grow and experimentation takes root, you usually get into this place of chaotic testing where you now have many teams who are experimenting, but they might be doing so with unregulated use cases and little oversight. So there's some practices and processes that are repeatable, but some teams are just doing it themselves how they want. And you might be getting lots of people experimenting, but you don't know necessarily that their results are trustworthy without doing a deeper dive into what they're doing. But our end goal here, like all great companies, is to be at a place of pervasive testing where all product teams are experimenting. You also have things like personalization to increase impact and optimization. You're doing things like not just the product, but also AI model evaluation and paid ad campaigns. And all of this is automated and it is governed for quality. And so that's the holy grail. Only right now, what we see in the market is that, there's a few companies who test in this way, and Eppo is dedicated towards getting more companies into this pervasive testing place. All right. And so when I think of companies that are really great at testing, Amazon is definitely one of them. And when you look at what Jeff Bezos says, it's about maximizing the number of experiments you can do per unit of time. And to do that, the key is reducing the cost of experiments, right? Time is your opportunity cost. And so to run as many experiments as possible, to get as many swings at bat as possible, it's about reducing the cost of these experiments. The other fact of this is that only a minority of experiments are successful. When you look at the studies and what they say, is that the success is less than 50%. And if you look at where we have data on this, it's actually less than 33% in most cases, where you're getting a experiment that had a statistically significant positive impact. And so if you look at Microsoft, what they found was about a third of the time it was success, about a third neutral, and about a third negative. And so that means if only one in three experiments are successful, you have to run three experiments for every metric impact project that you want to make. And so that means that we just don't have time to go at this slowly as product people, as experimenters. We have to make sure that we are getting these swings on bats, that we had reduced the cost of running these experiments. And there are all these process challenges when we think about what gets in the way of doing this. From the product side, I think about how do, I get this product started? What do I do if something goes wrong? What is the primary metric? What are my secondary metrics? How do I know that it's running correctly once we start it? Making sure that I'm following the documentation guidelines. And then on the other side, you have data analysts, the experimentation experts in your company, and they need to think about how long the experiment needs to run, and they have to coordinate with the PMs and engineers running the experiments. They need to talk about how can they make decisions from the data, which guardrails should that team be looking at, does the team have a rollout plan based on the decision made, and then how are the findings captured and disseminated throughout the org. So there's a bunch of questions that need to be answered, and here you have multiple roles who need to be talking to each other about the right answers to these questions. When we look at solutions to these problems, how do we lower the cost of experiments? How do we break down these barriers? We look at what, again, the best companies are doing. And when you look at what Booking.com is doing, the thing that unlocked faster experimentation was allowing non-experts to run experiments. And that's what Eppo Protocols is. It's allowing non-experts to run experiments, but with the right quality guardrails so that such that things are running in the right way and that your inputs produce good outputs. All right, so you have talked about experimentation questions that different roles might have, and here's what the experimentation process often looks like. And you see that it is multi-persona, and it goes through many different phases where many different roles are talking to each other. And so the key advantages come when you can start eliminating some of these handoff roles in the experimentation process. And so, for example, if you have something like a protocol, you now have a prescribed path for experimenters to use. And so a protocol just means that this is the regime, this is the rules that a given team should be using. So you might have a search team and they run search ranking experiments. Well, those experiments should be run in a layer so that they're mutually exclusive with other experiments. They need a 99% significant threshold based on discussions that the team has had. And they default to no launch based on the risk of rollout. Or you might have a growth team and they act a little bit differently. They use a 95% significant threshold and they have guardrails specific for that team. And maybe those guardrails are around something like virality. And then you might have a pricing or a revenue team, and they're also a little bit different. They use a Bayesian regime. They have a rollout decision that needs to be reviewed by stakeholders given the impact that it's going to have. And so this is what we talk about with protocols is that it is these prescribed paths, these regimes that teams need to use. And but in using them, this will break down barriers while maintaining the right layer of governance that is correct for how the different teams are experimenting. And so you can see how some of this starts to look in Eppo, and we'll walk through the demo in a moment, but it allows you to choose a protocol and set different actions such as and settings such as what the metrics are, the decision criteria, and what the analysis plan looks like based on which team is experimenting and what type of protocol they want to use. So you go from a place where you have to set all these things up that you see on the left side. What's the title? Assign it to a team. Okay, what's the entity I'm testing on? Maybe I have, multiple sides of my marketplace. I have the supply side and the demand side. So which one am I testing on? Where is the source of that data? That's what we call assignment SQL. Where's the source of the data that says who was enrolled in which experiment? What's the stats plan? What's the primary metric? What's the guardrail metrics? These all get automated with protocols and take out a number of steps and cross-functional handoffs that allow non-experts to run experiments. And it's not just about the configuration settings of the experiment, it's about driving decisions and automating that process as well. Because if you can get to a place of concluding experiments, that means that you can set up new ones and work on hypotheses for new ones even faster and start building on your learnings. And so it's not just about what are we going to do to set this up, but it is also about what should we do based on the results that we see. All right, so now I'm going to take you through how you set up a protocol in Eppo and then how it applies when you create and run an experiment.
And just a quick reminder to everyone, if you do have questions, go ahead and throw them in that Q&A box down below. Thank you.
All right, we are looking at Eppo. And so when you begin experimenting, you can just go here, you can create a analysis, and you see we have a number of those steps that we talked about. What is the title of my experiment? What is the team that is experimenting? I need a hypothesis for my experiment, and then I get to choose a protocol here. And here we'll start from scratch. We'll create a new protocol so we can walk through it right now. So create protocol, this actually lives under our admin over there, but we'll start with a new protocol. Let's call it webinar protocol. And we'll get started. And so there's a number of things that we can choose to do here. So first, if someone's creating a protocol, it will be scoped to their team. I'm an admin today, and so I can create a protocol for everybody. But let's say that I am just on the product team, which I am. I can create the protocol just for my team, as this is the reusable template that we're going to use. Then we set up the analysis settings. So who am I experimenting on? Well, today I'll be experimenting on users. And then where does my data live? Well, this is in my feature flagging table. I can look at the stats settings and make sure that these are correct for what I want to do. In this case, I do want to do a sequential with 95%. I'm also going to turn on multiple testing correction. Based on the number of metrics I have in here, I want to make sure that my primary metric is as free of bias as possible. And I'm going to set a default runtime. So when experiments run with this protocol, they'll be set to run by default for 14 days. This can be changed, but that's what we'll start out with. I can now set decision criteria that I want to use here. And this starts with selecting the primary and guardrail metrics. So I'm going to run a purchase, one that's about the revenue per user based on the checkout conversion. So we're going to look at a primary metric of revenue per user. And for guardrails, I'm going to do this, but I want to make sure that I am not impacting any support tickets. Oops, keyboard go. All right, support tickets per user. I'm going to apply that there. And I can set the threshold here. So this means that if we see support tickets increase by 5% or more, this guardrail will be triggered. And we will get a warning that even though the revenue per user, might go up, maybe it's neutral, we don't know yet, but we will have this alert that tells us whether the support tickets also are impacted, whether they increase, in this case, more than 5%, or we can do something like maybe our purchase volume decreases, even if our revenue per user goes up. That's another guardrail that we could look at. So here I'm going to use this and use the default. And now I get to set this decision criteria based on those scenarios. So I think most folks are familiar with the big winning upside of you have your primary metric with a statistically significant positive result. And then your guardrail metrics, there's no risk that you're seeing. Well, I think in almost every case, we choose to roll that out. And the same thing with the downside, with a statistically significant negative result. And it really doesn't matter what the guardrail does. If the primary metric is negative, you're going to choose not to roll it out. But you also get to decide what makes sense for you and your company, particularly in these questions in the middle, these scenarios in the middle, where different teams, different companies have different policies. For example, you might have a statistically significant positive result. This is what I was talking about before. But your guardrail metric, my support tickets, have a threshold breach that says they might increase more than 5%. What do we want to do in that case? Well, some companies would say, and some teams would say, we need to extend the runtime. Let's get more data to understand whether there is a real risk here and then we can figure out what we want to do. Some teams would just say, hey, let's just discuss, right? Like, let's look at this. Maybe we want to dive deeper and analyze this and then discuss and make that decision. And maybe some teams just say, hey, any risk here, I don't want to roll it out. So
And Eric, we
these
did get a
pro,
request from one of
yeah.
the attendees to zoom in a little bit to make the
Oh yeah,
text a
sure.
little bit larger. Thank you.
Sorry, I apologize. I have a large screen. So here you can see that. All right, and so you get to select the defaults based on what makes sense for the protocol, and the company also gets to set these defaults as well. And finally, there's metrics. So we went through the primary and guardrail metrics, but usually there are additional metrics that you want to look at. There are exploratory metrics that you care about. So here are my decision metrics, but maybe I also want to know, how are people navigating through my product as a result of this change? Are they clicking on things more, interacting with different elements? Well, these additional metrics give me additional signal to understand and learn from the experiment. I'm not going to necessarily make a decision from them, but they help me understand better, how users are interacting with the changes I made. So I can add more, let's call them product metrics here, and I can add more things like I can add, clicks, different things. We have lots of different yeah, metrics here. So like total pages viewed by user, right? I don't necessarily make a decision based on if more pages are viewed by a user, for example, if I'm doing making a change, but it is interesting to know and to dig and say, did this change behavior? And then I can dig deeper and say, how did this change behavior? Why did it change behavior? What do I learn about how users interact with my product as a result? And so we'll often add these exploratory metrics. All right, and then when I am done here, I can publish, and then this will be available to run on any experiments that are run by the product team. And we'll do that right now. All right, so we'll go over here, we'll run an experiment, And this will be the webinar experiment. We'll select the team, product, and here we now see that our webinar protocol is available. And now this is going to start pulling in all those defaults that I had set before. You'll excuse me if I don't add a hypothesis here. Not good hygiene, but for the sake of our experiment. And then all I need to say is, what is the experiment key that I am using here? So let's say that I change the homepage hero for the North American users that I have set up. Great. This is going to pull in my control and my treatment, and my experiment has now pulled in all of that information for me. So when I go over to the metrics, here are all the metrics that we had set up as part of the protocol. And then once this starts running, which I have to do once I put in the dates for the experiment, this will start running and data will start being pulled in based on that data being available. So all I would add here are the analysis dates. Let's say it starts today. 14 days was the default that we had set. Save. And now this will start running and start filling up with data as data becomes available for it. You see now it goes into this running state. We're going to, for our sakes, look at some other experiments that have data. So we'll look at this app onboarding experiment, for example. And it's the same thing. It's built with a protocol. And you can see that here, based on this experiment, it's paid account conversion, the primary metric, had a statistically significant increase. And it also had a guardrail, again, the support tickets per user. You see that there's a threshold here of 5%. The whole interval is below that threshold. And so there's no risk here. And as a result, we're recommending to the user running this experiment that they should roll out the treatment based on this result. And they can also see all these additional details, such as, was the end date reached? How is it progressing? How much traffic was assigned? Were all the diagnostics, all the health checks that we performed, were those passed? And so this gives you a summary of, how you should make a decision and the health and progress of the experiment. And then once you have this here, you can just go and you say, hey, I have a positive result and we're going to roll this out, and now you can conclude the experiment. And then not only can you see this on individual experiments using Eppo and our insights, you can now see what's happening across every experiment that is being run. And so I can look at what is the aggregate impact that I'm making based on a given metric that we care about, based on all these different teams. And so maybe I just want to look at that product team, for example, and how many experiments they're running. And then I can also look at things like quality of the experiments that they are running as well. And so in that case, I want to not just make sure that every team has protocols that they're enabled to use to run faster experiments. I can now measure their inputs and outputs as well to make sure that they're following those recommendations and following those protocols such that they're experimenting with quality and winning as much as possible. All right, that concludes the demo I have planned. We'll go over to Q&A.
Okay, so we've got a lot of questions rolling in. One I'm answering on the via text on how to access protocols in your workspace. So I'll answer that via text. If Eric, you want to take a spoken one,
Yeah,
which is
we'll just enable it for your workspace.
okay.
That's the short answer.
There you go. Um, are there any limitations on who can create protocols?
Yes, so protocols can be created by anybody with an editor permission on up. So basically, anybody who would be creating an experiment, because that's the minimum permission you need to create an experiment, can create a protocol. They can only do so for their team. And so they can't, if someone's on the search team, they can't create protocols for someone on the growth team, for instance. Admins can create protocols that are global, that are applied to all teams or for any team that they want. But we do that such that, again, it's all about making sure that teams are not bottlenecked. And so, particularly teams that know how to do this, they can go and create their own protocols. Where teams need help, they can engage with an admin and they can help them get set up and get some of those protocols created that seed them and start them off to a successful journey experimenting.
Okay, thank you. One more just rolled in. Can users make changes to experiments that are designed using a protocol?
Yes. So protocols are defaults. They are default settings. Users can always go in and edit and change them. They can also run experiments without protocols if they like. It's going to require a little bit more setup from them to do. But if they're an expert and they know what they're doing, or they have a reason to do something custom, they can go and do that as much as they like. In the future, what we are expecting to build upon this is to give more to approval functionality to admins such that they can then approve when teams do want to do things that are custom. That gives you a little bit more oversight and governance when the default protocols or regimes are not being followed and something more custom needs to be built.
All right, thank you. And the last one we have for now, but if you do have any more questions, please go ahead and add them. But we'll answer this one first. Are all protocols company wide, or can their availability be limited?
Yeah, they can be limited by team. So if you have teams set up in Eppo, so again, if you have a growth team, a consumer team, a revenue team, a marketing team, they can all have their own specific protocols. They're just for their own teams.
Okay, perfect. With that, I think we can wrap it from there. That takes care of all the questions. So I'll say if you're interested in Eppo protocols and you're an existing Eppo user, go ahead and reach out to your CSM and we can get that activated right away. If you're not an Eppo user and you'd like to learn more about the platform, please go to geteppo.com and you can sign up for either a one-on-one demo with a sales rep, and they can walk you through the platform directly, or every second Tuesday of the month we have our widely available demo where you can just kind of log on in a webinar format, kind of like this one right here, and see the Eppo platform in action. And the next one for that is February 11th, so that's next Tuesday. Um, Huge thank you to Eric for hosting this great session, and thank you to everyone for joining. We'll see you at the next one.